Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. I'm Frozen Millen, and today we are hopefully going to be doing the last part of our over-analyzing series for SpellRogue, and then maybe I'll start doing other games as well, because that is something I think I would like to do as well. So if there's any games you want me to kind of over-analyze, get in depth with, try out, stuff like that, that I actually have some knowledge in, or I'm learning on the way, do let me know. But anyway, let's get this done. So the last stuff we got to do are some of the void spells. We got to go through some potions as well, go through the rituals, and then we'll do the runes. And maybe we might tag these on at some point, or might just speak to them as we see through normal videos. So the spells. So void spells. These you will probably not see amazingly or that often overall, but you will see probably a good amount of times. There are particular ones that I do like that are probably not very powerful, and there are some ones that are absolutely brilliant and can do stupid things with, and we've seen some of the stuff that I've been able to do with these spells in particular. But we'll go over them and individually think on like how good the power level is and stuff like that, and how I rate them in regards to synergy and where they can kind of fit into builds, into what you want to do. So just because something is an attack spell or a defense spell or utility spell doesn't mean that's how you're going to be playing it in the sense of what this spell represents. So let's start off with our first one, which I don't have quite just yet. I've got this locked, but we're not too far away from opening it, which is Onyx Lance. Now, this is interesting because Onyx Lance deals 14 damage as base on a 4 or 5, which is actually pretty good damage, and you can up it to 20 if you want to. Or you can change it so it does give you 14 Fury for another attack somewhere else, which is also pretty good. Issue with that is it's 2 die rather than 1, but think of it as like you're kind of repaying the next attack anyway, instead of just playing it twice. Issue with this is the lowest die becomes a silence die. If you've got ways to remove the silence, that's kind of useful in some way. There are sort of ways you can kind of unmute it in a way by getting some random enchants and stuff that kind of overwrite this after the effect, which could be kind of cool. Good thing about it is it's always in the lowest die, so there is a little bit of finagling there, and you can always cast this at the last point anyway to make sure it doesn't actually affect anything. So there is some way to play around this. I kind of like the spell. I think it's very unique. I love the flexibility that you have for both as well. I think this is quite a high level power card. The issue with it is the fact that essentially it's a 4s6, there's one attack that is probably not going to be your main attack, but it's something where you kind of use to chip away at stuff, like once every turn or things like that as well, and maybe help you set up for like bigger attacks elsewhere. So it's more of a utility offensive spell than probably like a powerhouse, so it's something to kind of watch out for with that, in my opinion. I mean, it probably can win you games really well, probably does absolutely amazing in certain types of runs, but when you probably see this, it's probably one of those ones where it's like, what's it up against? Is it worth me taking anyway? So always bear that in mind. Moving along though, we've got Amalgamate as the next spell. I like this spell. I think it's pretty interesting. Amalgamate, just being able to merge 2 die together, gives you the flexibility of having 1 die back with increased value. 2 5s also will overflow into 2 dies again, so you do get some more value that way. Nice thing about it is you do get the 4 armor, and you do have the flexibility to do a little bit of damage if you need to, or just get more armor on top of it. I like this spell. I think it has really good flexibility, and actually can work as a decent defensive tool depending on what you want to do, or just something that does a bit of both. So there is that aspect there as well. So I think this is quite a good pickup in certain, not even certain builds, just in builds in general. But it's always something to watch out for because there's something that's probably always more highly specialized that you could pick up. Moving along though, Convoke. Now, the good thing about this is all enemies. Muting this spell isn't that bad, to be honest, and you could always trade it down to get the mute on that. The thing I like about the fact this hits all enemies, it really does amplify things like Fury and Power Gain, because you're going to be hitting everything in kind of like the wide area battles, so that's kind of nice. And the extra damage is kind of nice as well if you just want to hit them once and then leave this for a couple of turns and then come back and do it again and so on and so forth. But I'd probably say this upgrade is just generally better because you'll get the 7 power from somewhere else eventually anyway. Just pointing this out, but it's a pretty good pickup if you can again make sure you hit that 6 dice value, because yeah, that's kind of difficult unless you're rolling them consistently, but it has some really good flexibility and synergies with that. Move along, Dark Arts. I got some old videos on my channel with this, and we've used it fairly well and effectively, and I like the fact that this just keeps increasing the amount of Rupture it applies every time you cast it. that is something where like this just gives you more and more value, and I quite like it. In my opinion, the reduction in cost is always more effective than just the increase in scaling, because it just means that it gets easier to cast it more times, which theoretically will make it scale quicker anyway. And 2 casts of this, and suddenly, you know, you're doing a lot of damage to something, especially if you do it on the turn which is already scaled up. So definitely worth a pickup if you need power scaling, but remember, when you do take this, you are just devoting a single spell slot to power scaling. So it is something to watch out for. And it takes some time to get going. That's the other problem with it. Edge of Insanity. I nitpick on cards like this just because of I feel like they don't do enough. 8 damage for 30, or 8 countdown for 30 is actually pretty good. The issue is the instantly ends turn. I don't really see this as an upside. Increasing the damage is probably where you're going to go. And applying weakness, okay, it's actually pretty good to kind of be like, aha! And you can always cast this at the end of a turn rather than immediately, but with some countdown reductions, stuff like that happen automatically, you could kind of ruin your day in some aspects. It's pretty good though. It is pretty good. And early game, I think it can one-shot a good amount of early game stuff, so there is the potential there as well. Issue is you want to set your defense up before you cast this. Just be aware of it. Can be a bit dangerous. But we like danger. Ether Echo. Now, this is one of the ones where I kind of really like it. Right? In both senses of it. I like the fact that just with the 13 countdown, if I cast this to get 2 die back, which means that I'm going to be able to reduce its countdown next turn again with just the value of the countdown reduction from the ether die which persists, and then I also could basically get more out of it by sacrificing a charge, which in my opinion is probably more effective if you are going a full countdown build, because once it's a cast, you don't need to cast it again to get more die, you just want it to hit other die anyway, or other spells with those die. The 10 countdown is kind of nice if you just want the extra die to persist around and kind of use it as a thing that just has a bit of die generation in it, and it kind of can also automatically cast itself simultaneously. So this is where you probably picking this one when you don't need the ether die effect as such, you're just using it to keep die around to spend in other spells consistently. So 2 different playstyles of this for the upgrades that you're going to be focusing on, and it has quite good flexibility, so definitely worth a think about as a utility spell. Again though, you are sacrificing this just for a utility slot, just to have extra die around. But I quite like it. Haven't really used it that much, but definitely is on my radar with things going forwards. Inscribe. I want to run with this, and I like the fact that it reduces the cost of stuff down by 2 on repeat. It does cost quite a lot with 5, but as a countdown effect, it doesn't reduce itself, but other ways could reduce it. And you could also just go for the upgrade to get it down to 2, and then you're going to be reducing lots of things with lots of countdown effects, so you can cast them easily. So like stuff with really high countdown costs, this could be really good just to basically get it all the way down to 0, or well, actually 1 in this case is the minimum you can get it down to, and then you can just keep casting it on repeat. So yeah, something to always think about. I kind of like this spell again. Moving along though, we got the Omniscience, or Omniscience, if you like to call it that as well. I think this is kind of interesting and cool. The issue with it is the Vex die aspect, but you're re-rolling a die and then receiving the Vex, and you're only going to get 1, but you also gain the Foresight the next turn, which gives you the extra value of the die. So either what ends up happening is you're going to re-roll it again and only get the 1 Vex for the next turn and 1 for this turn, which you can cast as well. And you could always just wait to do this at the end of a turn as well to get the Foresight for next turn and still cast the spell. And then you kind of get 2 extra die, and one of them is always going to be a 1, because Vex die seems to always make that happen anyway, or at least on the highest die. So it's kind of interesting. I like this. It's a way to kind of get extra die value as well as just a reroll, so the die doesn't go anywhere really when you want to be using it, and you can make it a bit more flexible, or you can just get more value out of it as well. The main issue with this is the vexing, but you can really kind of use that to your advantage, and it's not really that much of a downside, so I recommend it as a pickup really whenever you do get the chance to kind of have a look at it. But there are some really cool ones, and that's the problem. Now, Rewrite Reality, we had a interesting run with this, or at least I maybe put it up, I'm not too sure, where I used this with Sephara and the whole cascade mechanic. And because Manifold basically times everything by 2 anyway in X countdowns, I also got the extra bonuses from the +1 effects, which it's weird on how the math works on that. So I'm just going to assume a lot of you understand order of operations and things like that as well. The manifold value and cascade work really interestingly because the cascade gets applied to the die, then manifold is applied to the whole die's value. So it's like the cascade is within the brackets of the equation for you, which is kind of really interesting, which means you can get really good value out of that as well. Between this also has an X effect, so it really goes into that build really well, and I kind of love that idea of itself, just kind of like pretty much filling in. The ways you want to be using this, you've got two options, which is just you want to get more value out of the spell itself, so getting more armor, or if you just want to be able to generate more of the manifold die to kind of use elsewhere. So you've got two different ones. The main thing is how consistently can you roll 1s and 2s, pretty much, yeah. But really good utility spell, really good, I like it. Moving along. Strange Presence. This reminds me of Fickle Barrier, right? You get a die back, it's a Vex die, so that's absolutely fine. You could even get 2 Vex die with this on a 2, which if you're rolling lots of 2s, that's pretty cool, or you can just get more armor. This is a weird one, where I'd probably say it's actually pretty good to pick up, and is really good value in general, just for what it can do. The issue is can you consistently roll 2s? You know, this is the one if you just like the extra die, this is if you want extra armor, but to be honest, if you're relying on this for armor, you probably got other problems with your build. This is probably the better choice. Anyway, moving along from that one, what else we got? Next up, Sticks. I use this a lot. I love it quite well. I like it because it's a very unique mechanic. The idea of the Stygian die dealing damage is really cool, and this just adds an extra bit on top where you can generate them yourself and they re-roll every turn, meaning you can get different generates of value. I like this because the Stygian die always persist, which is really useful, and you got 2 different operations for this. I think just gaining more Stygian die is always more worth it because that gives you more DPS output, but there will be sort of a upper limit now you can hit with the limit on the dice value you can have. I wish there was a relic that kind of stopped you from having a limit on how many dice you can hold, or extended it a little bit, because that'd be kind of cool, because I like having like 20 die, and we've had some old runs before the full release that kind of did that, and they were pretty damn fun. The other one is giving them extra value, which will pretty much do the same thing with 6s and stuff if you put them in here, where they'll just overflow and generate 2 die anyway. So there is that aspect of it where you just want to increase its general value, which could be pretty good because you can even put your own die in there just to get extra value out of them anyway. So 2 different ways to kind of play it. It's a pretty good spell, has a very unique build, and it has interesting ways it can interact with different things, because we did use this, although we did not win with that run, we used this quite interestingly with the conduit mechanic, because each instance of these dice hitting causes that conduit effect to be triggered, which is kind of cool. So yeah, there are different interesting combos you can do, and things like Rupture can do similar effects as well. Moving along, Tendrils. I picked this up recently, and we made some good money with this in particular. I think it's one of those ones where if you get it early, it's really good. If you get it late game, you probably don't need it. So it's one of those things where if you see it early, it's actually worth the money to pick up, because you can use it as a finishing spell just to get free gold, and gold is actually pretty important if you're going to shops to get other relics, to buy particular spells and things like that as well, and also use them in events. So yeah, it's pretty good, and I suggest picking this up if you just kind of want something that can use as sort of a finishing touch, as it were. Both sides are pretty interesting to kind of have there. The extra gold is always worth it, gives you more value in the long run. This just means you've got the execution threshold a little bit higher up, which can be a little bit easier in the early game to use if you're going for that as well. But anyway, kind of a nice kind of finishing spell. Moving on, Alchemy. I don't know how to feel about this. The issue is the randomness of the potions, because you don't get to choose what potion you get, but it's kind of nice to have extra potions anyway. If you've got a lot of potion synergy stuff, pick this up. If you don't have that potion synergy stuff, you're probably not going to need this, but it is an interesting card or interesting spell to pick up. You can get force potions for basically this whole spell in a fight, or you can just make it easier to cast and make it a bit more usable in that sense. But other than that, I'd probably go for the extra spells, because more potions, and if you've got potion synergy, which is the only reason why you're probably picking this up, is pretty cool, you know, pretty cool and interesting to use in those sort of runs. But other than that, I don't think it's a bad spell. Like, potions are still pretty useful, and none of them really have any downside to them. And remember, you do keep them after the battle, the potions, so there is that aspect as well. Moving along from the alchemy, we then have anti-life. I will say it with this. This is pretty much a multi-hit attack for the characters that don't have as many multi-hit stuff. So this is like your Lapis, and also probably helps Haze a little bit as well. You know, it's just the extra multi-hit, which can really pay off if you've got a lot of power scaling and stuff like that. Other than that, you're probably not really picking this up as much, because you probably have already got things you want to set the build up with those anyway. The main thing on this one, in my opinion, is either going for the double hit and removing the Vex, or maybe if you've got ways to roll die in the same turn, maybe going for the double Vex isn't that bad for the extra hit, but that depends on how much you're scaling power and stuff. It's an interesting spell. I like the mechanic. It's really hard to cast though, and the downside on it is already kind of very difficult, and you can only cast it once, so yeah, it's probably power scaling wise, it's not as good as some of the other options you'll have with the characters anyway, but still pretty interesting. Moving along, Dark Dreams. I'd avoid this just like flat out right. Main reason I say that is just because the random enchantment can also be the negative enchantments, which can really ruin you if you're kind of relying on getting good stuff. If there was a way to, like, instead of having it just re-roll the die or get an extra charge, if there's a way to basically say, oh, you know, to like change one of these to the fact that the enchantments will always be positive, that would be a pretty good upgrade. Probably may not be picked every single time, but, you know, it makes it a bit more usable and more interesting. But I don't think the spell is necessarily bad because of that. It's just, Emma personally likes consistency when it comes to stuff, and if I can find a more consistent way to use things, I'm going to be picking those more often than not, and this just doesn't really fit with that, with the randomness element in itself. But could be a good meme run if I ever get the option to try it out, you never know. Moving on, Dark Star. Now, there was an interesting thought, because I kind of been trying to record this a few different times when I've making these sort of videos. Dark Star is very interesting because of the fact it has the auto cast on attack, and it's on the cast of an attack spell, which is interesting. You can set it to go infinite. When you do go infinite with, like, so it basically be used constantly. If I were to have 2 Dark Stars then attack, does the game just finish itself for me? That is my question, because I would like to be able to copy this, and that's going to be a build that'll come out at some point, because I am going to try and aim for this eventually when I get the opportunity. I will always take Dark Star, I will always upgrade it, and then I will basically just hope I can copy it at some point, because it's going to be hilarious when it happens, because all I will do is do cast 1 attack, and if it works the way I think it will just break the game. But it's kind of interesting. The other bit on this is the change in defense as well. It means that you can play a bit of a turtle build, gain the fury and stuff, and still do damage, which is kind of nice. You can do both 2 things. The infinite on attacks just gives that a little bit extra, kind of squeezing more value out of the attack spells. If you've got power gain, this also gains that power bonus as well. Doesn't gain the fury, just so you're aware, because that is a bit of a weird mechanic. The fact that it applies to the first spell, not the second spell. So yeah, there's that bit of an issue there, but there are ways you can really make use of this, and I think it's kind of interesting and has, again, an interesting mechanic. My thing with most games, stuff like that, I like things that are interesting. Whether they're good or not is irrelevant to me. I like it, they make you think, they give you really cool ways and cool interactions to do stuff, and that's what really kind of grips me into things. Moving along, Ethereal. Again, this is kind of cool. I think this is underpowered for what it does, because of the fact that you do receive a silence, which means that next turn or whenever you next roll a die, it's going to be pretty much useless for you to use, because silence is a pretty... It's a pretty big downside to have a spell silenced for basically a turn or 2 turns, depending on how it works, or when you use it. And just to receive 1 dodge for that doesn't really do much when you've basically got like probably 3 enemies attacking you. Just gonna point that out. It's better off you probably use 11 to probably put into defensive spells in regards to the value and actually just block everything that way, because you're probably going to be more consistent. But yeah, I don't know, it's interesting, but probably this is probably quite bad because of it. Moving along though, you have Gaze from Beyond, deals 60 damage. This is a lot of damage. It's a very high countdown, which is very difficult to cast. The upgrade will always be, in my opinion, to pretty much go straight into this sort of 20 damage. You're dealing 80 damage. This pretty much one-shots pretty much most enemies in the game just by itself. So if you ever get a chance to kind of turtle up a little bit and just attack this, it's actually pretty cool. The issue is the broken on 2 spells. The good news is if it's broken, you can generate enough die to get around that. That's kind of interesting, so you don't need to worry about it as much. And you can always go for the other upgrade and just take not have that big hit of damage as well, to kind of just apply it on one random spell. But yeah, I like it. It's kind of it's one of those things where I would say if you want a big hit spell with a downside, this is the one you go with. The other ones just don't really compare to it because the lack of damage that they deal for the downside is quite drastic and different. Broken is a lot different in my opinion to Silence, even though it costs you a die, because you can kind of still cast the spell with just extra resources. Moving along though, we have Glimpse of the Void. I like this. This is probably one of the only ways to gain potency in the game consistently, and this just gives you more die. The fact that it applies Broken to a random spell once you cast it is kind of irrelevant, because essentially once you've done that, the extra die you get can just remove the Broken, and that keeps happening on repeat. The other upgrade, so going down to 9, is probably the best one, because it means you can cast this a little bit easier, which means you're going to get more applications of the potency across the game as well until you've maxed out. Just having it to do 3 broken is a downside, because it means that you only get 2 die extra for the next turn, and you're probably going to have 3 broken spells, which means that is, with this spell being exited, other random other spells, you've got this spell which doesn't do offensive, and then 3 of your other spells are basically broken, which could be all your 3 attack spells or all 3 defensive spells that you've got, which means you could do nothing next turn. It's a huge downside just to gain an extra potency when you could just do this and get away with it. So yeah, always something to watch out for. Moving along, Grim Rite. I like this. This is your power scaling and defense scaling in one spell. I think both upgrades to this are kind of interesting. This just gives you more power if you want to focus on that power scaling a little bit better. This just makes sure the fact that the mute that gets applied to a different spell is a little bit easier to deal with. So essentially it's only getting rid of 1 random spell rather than 2. But yeah, it's something to think about when you are going through all these, and you know, something to think about. But it's probably one of the premier power scaling builds, and if you can get ways to kind of not worry about the muted, it's kind of pretty useful in that sense. So being able to, they say, swap out the spells. I don't know if that is still a ritual, to be honest, anymore, but it may be. We'll have a look. We'll probably find that out in a bit. Moving along from that, we have Inexplicable, which applies 2 days and 2 marked to all enemies, and then just basically destroys a random die. Now this is pretty interesting, just because of the fact that I'd probably be moaning about like having ways to kind of effectively deal with very particular enemies when they do a lot of damage. A 33% reduction for 2 turns is pretty good, and you can always cast this at the end of a turn, so you don't actually destroy any die. So there is that point. Does mean you don't get the damage bonus, but the reduction that you get in the damage you take is actually still pretty good, and it applies to everything. So this is one of those ones where I've always not really liked it, because of it seems like it doesn't do very much, and it has a big downside. It's very awkward to cast, but I'm probably really underrating this, and I think like if I get a chance to pick it up and just actually use it, it's probably a lot better and perform really well compared to what I think it will do. Especially if I actually use it correctly as well. Like, the change the countdown to basically 4 means the fact that I'm casting this every turn, at the end of every turn. The fact that the marks will apply for the next turn afterwards as well is pretty cool, so I can do some really big hits while also still having the days, and then cast this again to keep stacking that on to make sure they can't really do much to me. So Yeah, definitely worth a really good think about and do some trial and error on my part to see how real, like, actually how good it is. Moving along, Invoke Mana. 2 die to get 3 die back. There are easy ways that you can generate 1s, and there are some ways you can generate 6s. This is actually pretty good, works with a lot of different characters. The best upgrade for me, in my opinion, it can be either, it depends on what you want. If you want the burst of die to cast everywhere, do it this way. If you got other ways to generate the same things within the same turn after the first roll, then you could go this way and you get more die to get more value in that way. So yeah, they are pretty both good upgrades and definitely worth a look at if you just want easy ways to generate die. But obviously that cost can be a little bit difficult sometimes, if depending on what build you got and what relics you have, or sorry, artifacts and stuff. Moving along, Mana Symmetry. Man, this has gone through many different iterations overall, in my opinion. I like this spell. The main thing I'd be using it for is to duplicate buffs and stuff on particular die and things, and basically being able to use them in different ways. I think now, with the way that this functions, the extra usage out of it isn't really worth it. You probably want the flexibility to basically copy something that's really important, that's on a higher cost die. But it's an interesting thing, has some flexibility as well, and you know, more die is more die. So essentially this gives you an extra 1 or a 3 every single turn if you roll 1, so it's still pretty good. You know, an extra die is nothing to sniff at, and people will take really big sacrifices to be able to trigger that off. And essentially what this would mean for you is lose a spell slot to be able to get an extra die every turn. And you get to choose it, which is also the good thing. You can choose it on the highest cost die that you have if you've got that ability to do so with this upgrade. So yeah, bear that in mind. Moving over, Power Nexus. If you are power scaling and you need some defense, this is a great way to do it. The issue with this is the fact that it's not great defense immediately, so you do need some turns to set up, which means you can then sacrifice on having 2, like, some attack spells to kind of fit this in with a defensive build. So, like, 3 defense spells, a power scaling spell, this spell to go along with that power scaling, and then 1 attack and then your signature kind of thing, you know. Just kind of throwing stuff out there with build ideas. Overall, depending if you can consistently roll 5s, you either go for the extra charge or the better scaling. Both do really good things, just depends on how many times you think you can cast this in a turn. And I kind of like this spell probably a little bit too much as well, because it does get me into trouble when I just don't have enough defense. And last, by no means least, we have the Stellar Ward for the Void spells. I've liked this, I've used it once, I think, overall, and we've actually had a win with it, and I think it was in my Infinite run with Hazel, and the ability to just give random spells extra charge is pretty cool. The ability to get a good amount of defense out of it as well is also pretty cool. Don't underestimate 20 defense, it's quite a lot. The issue is it's pretty difficult to cast with 4 and 4s being, you know, very consistent. Is going to be hard unless you can kind of guarantee those 4s. But interesting spell, like the mechanic behind it, and this is a great way if you've got other ways to roll lots of die and maybe get extra spell charges back on this spell as well, because basically you're going to get more charges elsewhere. But yeah, overall, rest of all the Void spells, they're pretty interesting, have really cool mechanics and stuff, and a lot of them are all really kind of like support tools rather they are more offensive stuff, so that kind of goes in with the weirdness that they have as part of the Void. Now, potions. Not the most entertaining of things to go around, but I still think it's worthwhile to kind of like talk about them. So, with the rarity potions, with the sort of lower cost potions, in my opinion, some of the better ones are things like the Marked, the Blast Pot, because it just deals some good damage. Rerolling with that is kind of a get out of jail free card, but you only see this with Lapis, so it's something to watch out for. Again, the critical you only see with Azar, which again, getting this is pretty cool. If you got one big hit and you're ready to go, drink this, make the hit, does double damage for that one particular thing, so it's pretty cool. Applying the Discordant, this is probably a pretty good potion, even though I don't like the effect of it, because every hit you hit them with, you get 5 block back, which is still pretty good amount of block, really, depending on what you're hitting them with. And it's when you attacked this turn, so I don't know how that works in multi-hits. If it hits them with multi-hits, maybe you get more, but I haven't really used the effect that much to actually kind of say that is exactly how it works. But if it does, that's even better. So something to watch out for with this. And lastly, you got Spike Seed for Hazel, which is her signature potion for the standard ones, which gives gain 5 thorns. 5 thorns is very useful It just means if you're defending, you're dealing some damage back. And against multi-hit enemies, this can be pretty good to have in your back pocket just to use immediately. And then put it out there just to make sure they basically will hurt themselves against you. Other than that, we got the Energizing Potion, which, to be honest, I always forget exists, and I never end up using it, so I end up normally tossing it most of the time rather than actually using it. But there are ways where you could keep this just in case you need to get extra defense on a defense spell you just depleted. So do bear that in mind. The other one is Iron Skin Potion. This is very good to give you that burst of defense when you want to survive a particular hit or a particular turn. Normally those first couple of turns when you want to set up just makes it easier, because essentially this is like a double spell cast to get the same amount of block in most cases. Moving along, getting Manifold on 2 of the die because double value of X effects. If you've got X effect spells in your repertoire, pick this up. You won't be disappointed when you can use it at particular points in certain fights to kind of either save you or just deal as much damage as possible. Then you got the Regeneration Vial, which is actually pretty good to give you a little bit extra health. So if you're going to a fight where you know you can kind of stall it a little bit, or it's going to go a bit on longer than you think, then drink this at the start. You're going to get 15 health back across that as well. And then we have the Soothing Solution to remove all afflictions. This is good for a couple of boss fights, as also removes drain. So think about that when you're going through. It just basically means that certain things like the Malediction debuff that you get, which keeps stacking damage at 5 extra every turn, just gets removed immediately, and that is huge because that could pretty much just win you the fight by itself with removing that affliction. Going across, splitting a die is pretty useful, just get you an extra die for a particular turn, which can be quite nice. The weakness is really good again, pretty much works in the same way as the Iron Skin Potion, but mainly works better against a bunch of enemies rather than just one. Now, moving on to the more uncommon potions, I guess you'll call them. The Azure Potion, which is actually pretty good, +3 to all die. That's hella useful, in my opinion. It means the fact that if you've got low cost die, you can increase them, or if you've got high cost die, you trigger the overflow effect and get lots more die back, so that's actually pretty good. Sephira's signature potion in this slot for these is going to be the Cascade Potion. This is huge. Like, you're basically getting +4 on all your X effects, which is actually quite a lot of value. Plus, there's multipliers involved with a lot of her spells, so I think it's always worth having this in your back pocket if you do have any X effect spells. Very similar to the Manifold Potion, or the Plurality Pilter that we looked at earlier. Phoenix Pearls for Azar. This is actually really good. It's just 4 extra die. That's all you got to know about it. It's just 4 extra die for the turn with no downside. There is even a potion here that basically takes health from you for rolling, like, 5 die, so 4 of them is still pretty good for free. Foresight, you play this basically when you know you want to have a really good turn for the next turn. I think it's pretty good as well. Gaining 3 Foresight is huge. That's 3 extra die for your next turn. Sacred Herb Tea, rolling 2 5s or 6s. If you're really focused on that 5 or 6 build, this is brilliant. And it also will trigger some of those effects for rolling 5s or 6s as well, guaranteed, which is kind of nice if you've already got the potion for this for Hazel. Smoke Screen. This is one of those potions where, like, it is good when you need it, but in most cases you're going to block enough by yourself and then only take probably 1 hit. You want to be using this when you know you're going to take 3 hits separately and there's nothing you can do about it, and you just focus on being offensive for the turn instead of defensive. So, yeah, bear that in mind. And then we got the Toxic Vial. This is 8 poison applied just to a single enemy, which is actually quite a lot of damage when you're thinking about it. I mean, just overall, you'd be looking about, I think it's about 36 damage with this, if my math is correct. Someone double check me on that. But I believe it's around 36 damage, so yeah, it's quite a lot of damage just for a single potion, considering like this one only deals 15, and some of the other ones we do, like the, the Holy Potion deal 30. So yeah, it's over several turns, so it's something to bear in mind, but that's a good one for Lapis, and it does stack up poison if you're a poison build. Moving along, the Vampiric Essence is pretty good if you're doing big hit stuff and you need some healing. This is a great way to get it applied. You just get half the damage you deal unblocked wise back to your life total, which can just probably save a run in some cases as well. And you can always try and figure it out and delay certain fights to try and use this potion to get as much value of your health back as you can. Volatile Concoction. Deal damage to all enemies equal to the total die value. This, if you can get enough die and set up, can do quite a lot of damage. Overall, like, it's damage value wise, you're probably looking on average, if you just got a normal build, you're looking at probably about 5 die, average about 4, so about maybe 20 damage-ish, but you probably want to try and get more out of that if you can by generating other die and stuff. But it's a pretty interesting one that has a good amount of flexibility, but the range on it is very wide, so it's something just to watch out for. Now, moving into our rare ones, we got for one for Azar, -7 to countdown to all spells. This is brilliant. Any countdown effect just pretty much will be triggered instantly with this, or basically be costing a lot less afterwards. So yeah, quite useful, probably worth saving for very particular certain situations when you want to use this and get as much value out of it as possible. Moving along, we've got the Cloudburst Nectar to gain 2 hailstone and roll a die for Lapis. This is really good. This alone gives you power scaling for a fight, and quite a lot of it as well, because every time you roll a die, and it rolls die itself, is you are going to get 2 Fury, and that's quite a lot of power scaling with the amount of die you roll each time, because you think with 3 die or 4 die, you're getting 9 to 12 damage every single turn for the next hit, which is a Rage Blade, basically. Over here, the Crystal Snort, which it gives you 5 power. Again, 5 power is pretty good, and is pretty good for boss fights and stuff, so it's worth having as well as elites, just to try and make sure that fight is a little bit easier if you do damage. Obviously, multi-hit attacks are going to benefit this more than just single-hit ones, but, you know, it's still pretty good. Moving along to your Flask of Echoes. This is really good for your setup spells or defensive options. You know, you can do really good damage with burst damage and stuff like that, but the spells that give you ways to set stuff up or only have 1 charge basically means that you can turn around and cast them twice for that turn, which is really good, and you're going to repeat that, and then you get to do it again afterwards once you've cast that first one, because you get 2 charges of that spell echo to use. So again, that's why it's a pretty good potion. I highly recommend picking this up if you do see it, because of the fact that it can pretty much turn a fight or save your life in some cases. Holy Water. You only really get this one from an event anyway, so you're going to get like 3 of them as well, which is 90 damage. So it is something to watch out for if you do see it, and it's worth just picking up those potions. Or I think maybe you get 2 of them as well. Maybe it's 2 of them, it's 60 damage, but still, it's good enough to get you through a good elite fight pretty quickly, or at least chunk them down to make the fight more manageable. Moving along though, we do have the Life Force Essence, where it gives you 5 max life. This is a pretty good potion in the sense that it just gives you a life total, and it also increases your life as well by 5 if you do use it. Bear in mind, if you do have this, use this in a fight if you're on higher descents rather than outside the fight, because the application is different if you have the debuffs for it. So bear that in mind. Drinking the potion will give reduction value if you're outside the fight with the debuffs. Moving along, we do have the Potion of Divination, which is a pretty good potion. Gives you Blessing, gives you Foresight, meaning you're going to be rolling 2 extra die for the next turn, and they're all going to be blessed. So 4 die are going to get +2 to them as well. Hazel loves this potion as a big one. You're going to get so many die for the next turn that you pretty much set up, and it's almost as equal to the Phoenix Vial or the next potion, which is the Shade Power Vial. Roll 5 die, lose 3 life. This is excellent for that turn where you need to survive, or you just need extra die to cast a particular spell or get a good setup done. 3 life is nothing in the grand scheme of things if you get yourself set up an extra turn earlier or a couple of turns earlier. Mind you, if you're looking at countdown builds and stuff like that, average die value is about 3.5 on any roll and stuff like that you're normally going to be getting, which means that you'll be looking around about sort of 15 to 18 in regards to value on the die total, so there is something to watch out on that. And last one, but no least with the potions, is the Vial of Storms. Gain 8 electrified. This is pretty good. You're going to get extra static for this. You're going to be dealing extra damage, and it's quite nice to make sure that you can always keep gaining 8 static every single turn, which is a lot of damage in a fight, especially if you're going over multiple turns. So definitely worth a pick up with Sephara. Moving along though, the rituals are the next things we've got to do, and we'll go through all of these as well. I've played with a good amount of them and then used them in different ways. Some are my favourites and some I don't even know exist, so let's start this off. First of all, Arcane Infusion. Target spell gains +2, 5 or 5 damage this turn, which is basically the first use out of it, second use and third use, depending on how many charges you've got. And on the third countdown usage, when you do use it, the target spell gets +2 charges, meaning you're going to get a lot more value out of it. This is really good if you're going to go all offensive and you want to be using a multi-hit spell or things like that as well. Other than that, it's just a basic upgrade to the thing, so that's also not a bad thing to have. Astral Attunement, random spell gets 3 charges, or all spells get +1 charge. In my opinion, this is not that great, because in most cases the extra charges don't really matter. The randomness on the +3 is a bit awkward, so you want to be casting this on the +3 anyway, and by that point you're probably going to be casting a lot of spells, so it would probably be better as like a little bit different, like +1 to everything on the first one, and a target spell gets +3 on the 3 slot one, maybe, I don't know, with the count, sort of the count effect. Awakening. This is another way you can gain potency, and it's actually a pretty good way as well. Does mean the first time you cast it, you basically get put as a -1 die deficit for the next turn because you get the fumble, which is basically going to stop you from being able to roll fewer dies the next turn. There's no way to stop that or use it immediately. It has to be the next turn, which is a bit of a downside. But other than that, I mean, you can just roll a die immediately every single turn extra and basically lose the next turn. So essentially it can work as that. Even rolling 2 die this turn extra and losing a die next turn is still pretty good every other turn, right? So there is that aspect of it as well. Has quite interesting ways to play around this, and I like the idea of it even on all levels because of the way that it functions. Because it's a bit more interesting, right? I gain 1 die, then lose a die next turn, gain 2 die this turn, lose a die the next turn, gain 2 die and lose 2 die next turn, but I also gain a potency. Very interesting as part of the mechanics go. Moving along though, we got the Conjuration Chorus, where we roll 2 silence die, which is absolutely terrible, but you then have the option to basically use those immediately in a tough spot, and you can use that at any point. And if you've got 2 charges on there, you can gain a Foresight for the next turn, which is still pretty good. Like, you just use that to gain a Foresight for the next turn, or you can use it to gain the Spell Echo, which is a pretty cool mechanic. In some cases, you're not using it for the die, you're using it for the effect it gives. So, again, pretty interesting flexibility, allows you to kind of work around stuff, and probably not a bad pickup anyway. Move along, Crisis Orb. I picked this up many times. The burst defense is huge and can really help you out defending yourself on particular turns. Once you get to that 4 count slot, you can then gain the extra Fortify, which means that all your spells are going to be better to give you block. This only affects spells with the Fortify, so bear that in mind, but it's actually pretty good. If you do get the Reinforce, this does double its value, so I think it does double its value, as far as I'm aware, because it's when you gain block, not the spell cast. So let's double check that. Why not? Let's double check that with the Reinforce. Where are you, Reinforce? Actually, we can just do it on relics, can't we? Knowledge. Name, type. There we go, type. No. Elements. Reinforce. Oh, no, it's spell. Okay, my mistake. At least I double checked for you all. At least I double checked. I'm not a complete moron. But yeah, it's still pretty good damage. Like, pretty good damage reduction for that block that you get for it as well. Moving along, Cultivation. Yeah. This is really, really good. Like, it feeds into itself. It also gives you extra buffs as well. So you either get +1 to all sapling die every turn, which gives you +2 basically to them, and there are other ways to buff that as well. You either get to then roll 2 sapling die, 1 or a 2, and then on the 3rd slot you get to gain the thorns, and you gain 3 thorns every sapling die you have, which can be quite a lot of them, especially after you've set yourself up a little bit. Really good thing for Hazel to pick up. Highly recommend it for any thorn build or even a sapling build. The Death Link. The thing about like this is every second turn you can gain a power. It does link 2 targets together, so when one of them loses life, the other one does as well. So there is that kind of cool thing when you kind of link them both together. And this also can target you as well, so bear that in mind, because it's 2 target units and you are a unit. So there is some interesting mechanics there if you think you're going to take hits yourself. Just so you're aware. You can make them hurt themselves by hitting you. So yeah, very interesting part of the mechanic. And I think that's one thing that people didn't realize with this, is the fact you can target yourself. And I did test that in a way that I was thinking, oh, I probably shouldn't do this. Moving over, we've got the Elemental Overdrive. This just basically means that you can get the extra status effects on your spells, which is actually pretty good. You can use some very particular things that are going to give you the things like the Potency, or other ones like the Fortify and stuff like that, where you can get some really good defense or good offense, and things that basically give more compounding effects than what you have of them, like the Electrify, like the Hailstorm, stuff like that as well. Or even Grow. Or Growth, sorry. The other cool thing about this is this gains charge for every potion use that you have. So you can use this on your second turn, drink 2 potions, then use it again, and then use it on a spell to go immediately if you wanted to. So there's that flexibility also with this. Moving along, we've got Empower. Now this is kind of cool in the sense that if you use it every second turn, you gain a power. If you use it every third turn, you gain 2 power. And if you use it every third or fourth turn, you gain 3 power. So yeah, you want to be using this pretty much on the second, third, or fourth turn every single time. You'll gain a good amount of power out of it. Probably the most optimal way to use this effectively, in my opinion, is to basically use it on the third turn, because you will probably gain more power in the long run, and it means you can kind of cycle it through a little bit easier, because fourth turn just means that the scaling only gets better later on rather than earlier on. But yeah, Epiphany, cast a random spell, cast target spell. Pretty good. You can either force it by casting every other spell except the one you didn't cast, and then cast it on 2, or you can wait until the next turn and cast it, and it does use the highest possible value in that dice kind of spell when you are actually casting it. So if it can fit a 6 in there, it's using a 6. If it only goes to 5, it's using a 5. So always bear that in mind with this, because that can actually cause some other interactions to be triggered based upon the value that goes in them. The Essence Collapse. Destroy all die, and then just roll a bunch of die. This is really cool for the dice destruction builds that you'll see as well, but it's also really good for just having extra die once you've got rid of everything else as well in your hand for the dice. So you just cast everything, then cast this when appropriately to either gain a die at the end of the turn, or 3 die every second turn, or 5 die. And yes, they're 1s to 3s, but still, if you've got ways to use them, it's really good value, and it's actually probably one of the better ones. I kind of see that with Azar as well. Now, moving along, we have, yeah, because that's only Hazel on that one. This one for Sephara, target die becomes enchanted with the Eloan, or you can roll a Eloan die for 1 or 2, which is still pretty good, or you can roll a Echo die, which Echo is also pretty good. This is really good if you've got the shifting builds, but it does have the flexibility to leave it until 3 if you don't need it. And the extra die roll on the second turn is actually still pretty good as well, even if it is just 1 or 2, because there are spells that specifically do need 1s or 2s with her as well, which is kind of nice, because the value can be more important rather than the enchantment. Final Gambit. Morph a target spell. Morph all spells. Reset target spell. Ugh. I don't know what to think about this. I think, as it says, it is the final Gambit. It's just like, change all my spells to random ones and see what happens, and then we'll just go from there. And then you can then morph reset a target spell back, or you can continue to keep morphing random spells consistently every turn and just see what you get. So yeah, the meme build if I ever seen one. And imagine this keeps happening every second turn where it just morphs all your spells. That's a run and a half to have. That'd be very interesting. Overall, the Flux Reversal. Now this is nice in the sense that you can kind of flip 1 random die or 3 random die every second turn, or flip them every third turn and get 2 concoction. If you really know which ones you want to flip, that's kind of nice, and you can kind of force it to land the things you want. Remember, it'll only flip the die to the number you have, so that's kind of where you can control the aspect that you want, and the concoction is actually pretty good to have as well, because it means you get some way to kind of control which spells you cast. The issue is, if you do this straight away, you know, you might end up getting some weird die and weird die value because of what it flips, essentially. Moving on, Fortune's Favor, +2 to a random die, or 2 die, or 3 die. I have seen this, it is very interesting, and Mana Flux is a very interesting thing to have, because a random die increases equal to the value of Mana Flux at the start of each turn. So essentially, if I have 1 Mana Flux, or 2 in this case when you get it, it's going to increase a random die's value by 2. If I have 4, increase it by 4, 6 increases by 6, and so on and so on and so on every time it's being triggered, which just gives you more and more die the more times you get a multiple of 6. So that is actually pretty interesting. Moving along though, Lathful. Now, I've got an argument with Lathful as a ability and this whole ritual. On the dice spent, you gain X charges on the spell, and then you remove the effect from the die, so you don't get the die back. My issue is the fact that it doesn't cause the deplete effect to happen before the spell is cast, because it's on the spent. That's the bit I'm annoyed by. This would be really cool if you got the charges after you cast the spell, because it means you can deplete the spell then get the charges back after. That's my only downside with this. Although the extra die roll every third turn is still pretty useful anyway by itself, so there is that to kind of have there, rather than the 3 random die becoming the Lathful. It's more just of I roll a die every third turn. Lifelock. Yeah, this is rather interesting. The main thing for this is the vitality, so basically reduce health loss by 3 at the start of a turn, or start of the next turn, which you can basically gain that 3 times, so it's going to happen the next 3 times, you're going to just not take as much damage. I'm assuming that's reduced health loss by 9 at the start of the next turn, if it's 3, but I'll have to double check that on how the maths works out. But Lifelock is very interesting, and you're going to be casting this probably every 3 times rather than 2, and you get 2 die back. But if you need to, you can sacrifice 5 life to get those 2 dice roll, or you do it on the second turn and get the 2 dice roll for free, and then you just got to deal with how you're going to take the wound damage. Move along. The Mana Vestige. I like this for the fact that if I cast this on repeat, or basically on the second turn, sorry, the highest die becomes the Remnant die, which is kind of nice because you can kind of keep passing the Remnant between casting die and getting a little bit extra damage here, there, and everywhere. But the main thing I like about it is the fact that I can trigger that Fate Weaving, which means I get to keep the die every second turn, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I gotta remember with these, the count, the lowest count possible is how many times you can cast it. So this has a 1. I assume that means you can't cast it on 2, but I'm assuming because it has a 1 and 3 you can, but I might be wrong on that. Someone let me know if that is correct. But yeah, most of them you should be able to cast if they say they've got the slashes between them on 1, 2, or 3, so that's kind of a bit weird. Like, I think the structuring of these is a little bit odd in some cases of how they're meant to be cast, but yeah, the effects trigger on the thing, and I'm assuming if there's no other trigger on there, they can cast any point. My issue on this one is I should be able to cast every turn and keep the Fate Weaving, but I don't think that works like this with this one. It's in my head, but maybe I'm wrong. Obsidian Mirror, lowest die becomes a mirror die, and the mirror die becomes the same value as the last dice spent. So basically, yeah, don't have to worry about it. You can cast this every turn. Duplicate random die is kind of cool as well. You just get extra value, or duplicate target die twice. So Obsidian Mirror is actually a pretty good way just to get extra dice value if you need it. Either value from the dice itself as the cost, or if you're looking to turn around and do that. Now, I'm not too sure how this works in regards to dice-specific value spells, so that's the one thing to watch out for, and I might need to test that out before I kind of give any opinion on it. But if it works the way I would like it to work, which is I could put a 6, or I could put a 3 mirror spell cost into a maximum 3 cast spell, but it does mirror a 6 I cast in the last spell, the X effects get triggered exponentially better, which means you get that extra interesting bit of value and dynamic with the dice value stuff, which could be interesting. If it doesn't, then it just becomes a 6, and then you got to put it in a 6 cost spell instead. So yeah. The Osiris, I can't pronounce that touch. Random dice becomes a icy die. with -2, +2, or +2. The main thing about this is the Grave Chill, which basically means you're going to generate random icy die, which gives you the chance to get the extra block from those spells, which will be basically half of the dice's value, which is actually still pretty good. So that's where you'll be casting this, just to gain that effect. Moving along, the Round Warp, which rerolls the lowest die, either 1 lowest die, 4 lowest die, 6 lowest die, I'm assuming. And then on a 3, you do that effect and you roll a die. So, yeah, don't know how that works. The wording on there is a little bit awkward for me. I have won with this before and I still forget how it works every time I see it, but I believe that is how it works. Unless it's into those values, I don't know, but no. Moving along, the Red Candle. I picked this up quite a lot because I do a lot of countdown stuff. Basically, to random spells or -3 to all of them is very interesting. I'm always a fan of just basically, you know, triggering it on that 3. You do get them -4 first, and then you get -3 to everything else as well, and that's quite a lot of countdown reduction depending on where it lands, so it is fairly interesting. Essentially, if you've got 2 spells, you could get -11 to one of them. Because you know that's how it's going. Refolding Rites. Lowest die becomes a manifold die, which is pretty cool, and 3 random die become a the manifold die, which is also pretty interesting as well. I like both of these effects. They're pretty cool, and the manifold can really help out with particular builds, so if you've got that sort of X effect build, pick this up. Soul Grasp. Front enemy loses 10, 25, 50, 75, or 100 health. This is just something where you just keep it going until you can one-shot the opponent with it, pretty much. Or you got to cast a 5 anyway. So, yeah, that's what you're using this for. It's just damage. Move along, Spell Catalyst. Target die become energized. Now, energized is something you haven't seen before either, so we'll explain that. On dice spent, increase spells, damage, and block until the next cast by the value of the die. So, now the die is spent, then the spell is cast, so it does increase the value immediately, which then disappears afterwards. Bear that in mind. On this, the 2 target die becomes basically energized. You roll a 5 or a 6 with the energized value, or you roll 2 random die, which basically gets any value. So, in my opinion, you want to be rolling this on the 3, because a 5 or a 6 with energized is far more useful than 2 random die with energized, even though it's 2 random die. But you have to wait an extra turn for it, which can be a bit annoying, and you might get less value because of that, because of how the X effect works with those die. And yes, this does work with the cascade bonuses and stuff like that as well, I believe. The Storm Song Balance. Tilt all die, you get to roll a 3 or a 4, and this is for a specific spell, or all die get +2. My thing on this is the all die get +2. Like, that's what you really want, right? You want to get every die to have the +2 effect. So, yeah, that's why you're picking it up, is just get more value out of the die you have. And last one we have here for Lapis, which is probably one of the best ones in my opinion out of all of them, is the fact that you can either True North, gain 10 Fury on the second turn, gain a Hailstorm, which is going to be good for any offensive attack spell you have, or gain 2 Hailstorm on the 4th. So, yeah, that's also pretty good as well. But yeah, pretty interesting rituals to pick up. You'll probably only get like 1 most of the time in most cases now. You used to get 2 consistently, but yeah, you're normally going to get 1 of them eventually. So have a little think. Sometimes some are really good, some that you set up builds by themselves, other ones kind of assist builds really well. So bear all these in mind when you're going through. Now, last by no means least, we're going to do the runes to get these out the way, and then we've done everything talking about through on SpellRogue. So our first rune we have is the Amplifying Rune. +1 to status effects, but you -1 charge. I kind of like this effect. To be able to get something else out of it, remember with all these runes, you must be able to apply the downside to the spell. And it must be able to apply the bonus side to the spell as well. Yeah, otherwise it can't equip to them. That is the main thing that you're going to have to be really aware of with this. Now, how upgrades work and stuff like that, if you introduce extra mechanics to the die, I don't know. That's something where I'm not really kind of like those fringe cases where I'm not sure how they will work, but try it, you never know. You might find something interesting and cool with the mechanics of them. But yeah, I like this. putting this on like really high value status effects is pretty important, but it's making sure that you can actually cast that to get that extra effect immediately. Essentially, instead of you getting the extra, like having to cast a spell twice to get double the effect, you can only need to cast it once is the way you want to be using this, which then just keeps up your dice economy. Anger Rune, this is a Lapis favourite one, which you basically just gain 2 Fury when casting the spell. Always bear in mind, this is always after the spell has been cast. It'll be the last effect applied to the spell, which means if you use an attack spell, you'll get the Fury after you've attacked, not before. So something to watch out for. But yeah, free attack bonuses for the next attack, pretty useful. Automation Rune. Auto-cast a spell each turn. This is one of the best runes you can pick up, and you slot this into setup spells consistently with high cast costs, or very awkward cast costs. Because casting a spell every single turn is hyper useful, and it's just going to give you so much value straight away. And it's even better if it's only got 1 cost, right? It's only got one charge on there. Move along. The Battery Rune. -1 to adjacent spells. I don't think this is very great. It can it probably is a bonus to a spell that already does this effect. It's really good, but other than that, it's probably not that applicable unless you've got countdown stuff anyway and you're casting something so specific. But remember, it's going to be adjacent, so you've got to try and work around that as well. Blitz Rune, -5 countdown cost and then -1 charge from the spell. This is really good on high value countdown things that you want to cast multiple times, but you probably can't cast them 3 times. You may can only cast it twice because of the cost of it. This just means you reduce the cost by a lot and you can still cast it twice with the bonus side effect. I would end up using this on stuff where you have the need to apply the deplete effect in particular things. So there is one good spell for Hazel I would end up using it on, which can we see that here? Where are you? Not Bastion. Where are you? What's the spell? There we go. Fortitude. Where you get the upgrade to this, to do this, and then you apply that rune, which means I need to put a 1 in it to cast it, and I gain 2 barrier after the 2 casts, and gain 5 armor, or 10 armor in total. So, yeah, that's how you want to be using these sort of things, in my opinion. Now, the Divine Rune. First cast, gain 3 Blessing. This is just really good setup for Blessing. It just gives you a bunch of it at the start, which if you've got a build that kind of spends the Blessing, it means you can start spending it immediately. So, yeah, kind of interesting that fact. Or it just gives you next turn after that first cast some really good extra value. Moving along, we have the Dominance Rune, which is +8 damage to -1 charge. It's a lot of damage. Again, you need to be able to sacrifice the charge on that spell, but multi-hit ones will really love this if you do get that on there, because that then is just going to give you more and more damage with this immediately. So, yeah, have a think about it. This is kind of a nice effect as well, especially for Sphera. If you're a static build and you want a spell you want to be able to cast repeatedly and you gain static anyway, then this is brilliant. You get to cast it twice with just spending 5 static after you cast it. So really good on spells that maybe only have 1 charge as well. And then we move on, we've got the Ember Rune, which gives you a Banefire when you use it. Hey, free Banefire is free Banefire. That's extra damage every single turn, and it's really good to be used on a spell you can be casting consistently with a high number of charges. Moving along, the Enchanted Rune. I would avoid this just because random enchants are terrible and can hurt you, so bear that in mind. But other than that, it's probably interesting. Exalted Rune. Gain Blessing. When you gain Blessing, sorry, -2 countdown. This works in your Blessing build. Put this on a spell that doesn't already have this effect, and suddenly you're casting it for free if you're getting lots of Blessing. Like, it's super good in that front, and Hazel really can make the most of this as well. Focus Rune. +1 charge. Pretty good on a spell that cares about the number of charges it has. Simple as. We've seen a few of them throughout different aspects of it. Main one's going to be things such as Lapis has got a few, I think, that cares about the amount of charges on there. I know that Azure does and Sephara does, so those are ones where it's just like you can gain more value by having more charges on the spell originally. Moving along, we've used this before, the Forecast Rune. Basically, the first cast, gain 4 rain. Pretty much just set up your rain production, so the fact that you can then roll spells to get countdown reduction on your spells that basically have countdown. So pretty good in that sense, and really good for that first spell you cast every turn if you're targeting a very specific spell. Moving along, we have Galvanic Rune, which basically gives you a free static, which if you're a static build and need to be able to generate to sell, basically spend the static, this is where you use it, or it's just free static gains a little bit extra chip damage. So yeah, kind of probably not that bad. Next up, the Embedding Rune, which gives you on potion usage gain 2 charges. This is probably good for when you know you want to be able to gain an extra charge to use it every turn, but it has kind of a low amount of charges. Remember, you can only actually have one rune per spell, so just bear that in mind. I wish you could have multiple, it'd be pretty cool to mix and match them, but the game does not work like that. But yeah, a potion usage, gain 2 charges, then cast the thing again. This also works quite nicely because the fact you can trigger a deplete effect to then basically be able to deplete it again and get the deplete effect triggered again. So bear that in mind with that sort of effect. Moving along, we do have the immovable rune, which gives you +4 block to the spell and then -1 charge. Now, how this works, I think overall it is basically per cast. I don't think there's any multipliers attached to this if there's other effects or things that work on there. But there are ones that are a little bit unusual, which I'm not sure how this will interact with, depending on if it's put on the spell or can even be put on that spell. But yeah, I mean, 4 block per cast is pretty good. If you've got a spell you can be casting multiple times. The -1 charge is quite a lot to sacrifice though. And yeah, that is kind of a bit of a big thing for defensive stuff. Moving along though, we've got the mana rune, which on depleted roll a Vex die. My problem with this stuff is by the time you deplete the spells anyway, you may not need the die, which is kind of a bit of a downside to them. Although it's still a die that's extra that comes from something else, so it's probably still worthwhile putting on something you know you can deplete consistently. Might rune is just 3 damage. Again, multi-hit moves is the way you want to be putting this on, but still pretty good if you can put on any attack spell really to give that extra bit of damage. Moving along, Morph Rune, deplete morph the respond to a random spell. I'm not a fan of this. I think it's absolutely awful. The fact it also gives an extra charge to the spell is probably what you care about more because it gives you the +1 charge, which means that you can essentially do the same thing you're going to do with this. It's the same rune. That's all you're really going to do. Just never going to deplete it really. Mystic Rune, Foresight Gain for Lapis, -4 countdown. If you've got Foresight Gain consistently, pick this up. It's actually pretty good, and Lapis does have a good amount of Foresight Gain. Moving along, we have the Needle Rune, which gives you Thorns on the cast, which I do like as well for Hazel, and I think you can make some really interesting stuff happen with this as well. If you've got stuff you can cast multiple times, or just getting a little extra value out of the spell itself. Now, this one is interesting, the Overcharge Rune, +4 charges, but the spell becomes unrestorable. Now, if there is a spell you wish to cast with, like, you know, it's very easy to cast, that you want to be able to just, like, rattle it off really quickly and get all the value out of it immediately, this is just really cool. I don't know how this functions if the spell is already unrestorable, is my question. I think it doesn't fit into those spells because you can't apply the negative effect, at least by my logic that I've kind of built over the trusting of the game so far. But you know, 4 charges is quite a lot of charges to get back, and then if you got things such as to be able to gain the concoction effect or stuff like that as well, that is going to basically mean that you don't actually use those charges that are unrestorable, so that's also another benefit on there. Moving along then, we got the Heavy Rune, which gives you +2 to a countdown tossed and +2 charges. The cool thing about this is you have to have a countdown spell for it to work, so bear that in mind. But there are spells that care about having a higher countdown cost, and there are spells that like to have extra charges. So you've got a pretty good 2 good options there to kind of apply to stuff. The problem is if the spell has high enough countdown, you may not be able to use those 2 charges. So there is that kind of bit of a problem with that rune there. But on that, kind of very interesting to have basically both of them be a benefit depending on how you want to use it. Moving along, we've got the Twin Rune, which is -2 charges to a spell, and then basically will repeat the spell. This is something that you know that you probably want to either deplete with, has 3 charges on there, which then means gives you the value of a one cast, but doubles the value of it, and you get the deplete effect very quickly. So that's kind of where you want to be using this in. Moving along though, we got the Pain Rune, which again, on deplete, roll a die, which is again a pretty good value. The Resonance Rune, at start about gain 3 charges. This is really good if you want that sort of setup turn, which goes into spells that care about having charges again. So it gives you the ability to kind of like really get a good amount of defense or really good value early based upon having those extra charges, and then they disappear. So just bear that in mind, they won't be there later, and they don't stay around either. They're temporary charges if they overcharge the spell. Moving along, we've got the Resurgence Rune, which gives you +1 to a random adjacent spell charge, and it minuses the charge immediately from the spell you apply it to. In my opinion, this is not very good. just to give a charge somewhere else in the cast. They have to sacrifice a charge in the current spell. I'm kind of like, eh. But the cool thing about this is, if you've got ways to recharge that current spell you've got this attached to, anyway, with just other effects or stuff like that, then this can kind of start going into that infinite combo territory depending on the set of spells you have. So it is one to watch out for if you think you can kind of eke out that value. Next up, we got the Sharp Rune. First cast, gain 2 critical. I think this is part of a setup spell. Right before you attack, cast that spell, get you 2 critical, then one-shot them. That's how you use it, baby, in my opinion. But it's also good for just getting a good amount of damage out as well. So there is the other option, because that's 2 big hits you can make against an opponent. Next up, we got the Shield Rune. Now, we saw this rune, which basically had double the block, but took a charge away. This just gives you the block of half the block, but lets you use the charge. So essentially, no downside. It's the same rune, but this has a downside of a charge, which this compensates for by making you cast it again. I'd probably go for this because I have the flexibility of having the extra charge if I want to cast it. You know, but this does help with the deplete effects as well, so bear that in mind. The Shifting Rune, that's kind of nice. I mean, it has to be an attack spell, but basically it will turn a non-shifting spell into a shifting spell. So there is that benefit. The downside of this, in my opinion, is that this turn effect. So, yeah, it's, you know, but there's still some really cool mechanics you can do with that. Moving along, got the Swift Rune, which is -2 on the countdown cost for the spell, which again can really kind of make some spells so much easier to cast and make them more consistent. So yeah, think about this when you see it. And then the Zephyr Rune, which basically when you gain a critical, you -4 countdown. Azar is going to love this if you get a lot of critical in different ways, because it will just minus countdown from really interesting spells, and that's just basically, it's a 4 going into a spell every time you get a critical. I mean, it's a free dice, basically. But yeah, other than that, that is kind of everything when it comes to all the spells, rituals, potions, relics, and runes for SpellRogue. I mean, there have been some updates since I've done my original videos, so maybe I might make some amendments to those, or kind of go through them again at some point. I don't know, it depends on what you guys feel like is going to be worthwhile. I might wait for another update that changes a few things, and then we can kind of go through those as well. But again, if you do enjoy these videos, do leave a like, subscribe to see more, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.